So as I've shared, it's called Bringing It All Together, telling the story of your ancestors with Kenyatta Berry. It's our pleasure to welcome her. Kenyatta Berry is an author, attorney, lecturer, podcaster, and professional genealogist. Kenyatta and her work has been featured in publications including Black Enterprise, Good Housekeeping, Real Simple, and the Wall Street Journal. Author of The Family Tree Toolkit, a comprehensive guide to uncovering your ancestry and researching genealogy. She's appeared on several TV shows and new programs, is the host of Genealogy Roadshow on PBS, and was a contributor to the New York Times groundbreaking 619 Project, which was recently made into a docuseries for Hulu. She was the 2019 Honorary Chair for Preservation Week and was recently named a Newsmaker in American Libraries magazine. Today, Kenyatta will discuss how you can share your family's rich history through story. Please join me in welcoming Kenyatta Berry.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'll make sure I talk into the mic. I appreciate you all coming together for this presentation. I know you've learned a lot about genealogy and how to begin your genealogy journey. So what I want to do today is really focus on what do you do with that data. I do this myself with my own family history. I love the research, but I don't necessarily tell the story. So what we'll go through is sort of the importance of storytelling, kind of how important it is to interview family members. I will reveal sort of a 2016 journey that I took that I call Reversing the Course. I used to work for a company called Cornerstone On Demand in Santa Monica, where I live, and I got a sabbatical for 7 weeks, and I actually did a family history journey. So I'll talk about that, and then give you some tools for researching, give you some tools, for telling the stories of your family members. So why is it important to tell a story? If you think about it, if you've ever watched Genealogy Roadshow, I really learned this when I was on television. I'd never been on television before. And really, stories engage people at every level, just not in their minds, but in their emotions, their values, and their imaginations. And so one of the things I learned, it was kind of frustrating for us, because when you do genealogy, you're all about the research. You're about the names, the dates, the places, the people you uncover. You just really want to focus on that. And when we started filming the show, they were really focused on the stories. And for me, that really meant, that kind of changed my perspective. And I found that it's very important to tell the stories of our ancestors. And, you know, stories, you can tell stories for positive change, especially today. And when we see the certain climate and things that are going on, a lot of stories are forgotten. So let's, today learn how we can help our ancestors not be forgotten as part of American history. So storytelling genealogy, as I mentioned, it's names, dates, and locations. That's really what we're focused on. But one of the things that we really need to think about is creating stories that stick. We all remember a good story someone told them, right? Whether it was something you learned in your childhood, you may have Native American ancestry, you may be Cherokee, you may have had someone who fought in the Civil War. Whatever those stories are, they're very sticky. And so what stories can do both in you beginning your genealogy journey to prove or disprove that story, but also stories can help you in revealing, uncovering, and sharing the information. And then stories inspire other people to research their family history. So when we did the show, a lot of people would come on with 3 questions. And those questions would be related to, my ancestor might have been in an orphan train, or 3 Irish brothers, or I heard this other story. And what we would do is either prove or disprove that. That's kind of the beginning of your genealogy journey, right? But once you prove or disprove that story, how do you share that? How do you tell other people about it? So what does it mean to tell a great story? You have to start with a message and think, who is my audience? Are you telling this story for your family members? Are you really just trying to be very excited? As genealogists, we're the crazy ones in the family. So are you just trying to share your message with everyone else and let them know what you uncovered? Are you trying to write a book? And then what do you want to share? There's so much information out there, but what do you want to share about your ancestor? When I think of this on my way here in the Uber from Santa Monica, I was thinking about it. And both of my grandfathers served in World War II in the Army, maternal and paternal side, very different experiences. But I want to tell their story. I don't know a lot about World War II. I don't study it as much as I study slavery. But I feel like since they both have passed on, my maternal grandmother died on my mom's birthday, her father's birthday, her birthday, in 2021, and my paternal grandfather died when I was about 13, so in 1980s. But I remember both of them, right? And I had very different experiences with them. And they are part of the fabric of African-American men that served in World War II. So what is my audience for that story? Is it an audience like you who's interested in genealogy? Or is it an audience of folks that study military records or folks that study World War II? Or is the audience just my family? So when you think about telling a good story and a great story, remember who you're writing for. I'm working on my second book, and I had a podcast guest who is a genealogist and a writer, and I was working through it been very difficult to really get through this second book, and I had a conflict. And one of the things she helped me understand is when you have a conflict in your story, are you telling a story of World War II veterans, or are you just telling a story of your family history? You have to work through those conflicts so that you can get that story across. And I think it's important for us to think about that. Now, when I talk about telling a great story, not everyone needs to write a book. Not everyone's going to write a blog post. Not everyone's going to have a website up or anything like that. You can just write a biographical narrative, a short 3 paragraphs, whatever. But just as long as you're able to document your ancestor's story, because you're doing all this digging with a purpose. And part of that purpose is to help you be connected to your family. But the other part of that purpose is to share their story. And so I've given examples of Genealogy Roadshow, but one of the things I did, kind of stalkerish, is my mom's family, my maternal side of the family, her mother, my grandmother Mildred Kendrick, who died in 2020, she is from upstate, well, actually her mother, my great-grandmother Esther, was from upstate New York. And way upstate in Caledonia, Leroy, York, so closer to Detroit in Canada. Detroit is where I was born, than any place else, than New York City. But I convinced PBS to have me do a hometown tour. And I went to Rochester, the kind of nearest big city. And I invited my second cousins. You'll see a photo of them. My second cousin's 2 times removed. One of them I'd never met. But I had it down to a science, like this is exactly how we are related. And I emailed her. And she showed up, my cousin Nina and her niece Nan, and then Marion came, and then Terry and Terry's sister Mita. Mita is a family name of ours. So all these folks show up in Rochester, and they don't know what they're showing up for, because I have a presentation about Genealogy Roadshow, all of this stuff. They think they're showing up, they're trying to figure out, it's a show about our family? Like, who is this person? So imagine meeting your cousin the first time when she's doing a presentation about a TV show that she's hosting, but the presentation includes your family. And so one way for me to share my family story and to share their story, because we're in a theater in Rochester, it's packed, there's a lot of supporters of PBS, and they didn't know any of this information. So I was able to sit there in front of my cousins who surprisingly set in order from lightest to darkest, which I don't think they did on purpose, but it happened. It's very strange to look at, but to share this story with them about our family. And that, to me, continuing to talk about my family history and talk about my family's story helps me kind of connect with them and make sure that their memories, their contributions are still here. And then you want to think about what events do you want to share or cover. I mentioned my grandfathers both being World War II. You may have a Civil War veteran, part of U.S. colored troops. You may have someone that was served in World War I. You may have someone that owned a business. One thing I don't think we do enough in African-American genealogy is we don't talk enough about businesses, right? About folks who own businesses, whether it was regional, some store, some shop, a barber shop, or even if they had an insurance company or whatever. I think just being able to share those stories are really important. And think about what's the most compelling. When you're writing your family story, what would be interesting to you? One of the things I thought about when I wrote my book, The Family Tree Toolkit, I had a blank slate. I'd never written a book before. And so I thought, well, what would I want, or what would I have wanted 20 years ago when I started doing genealogy? What book would have helped me kind of get through all the hoops and understanding and the overwhelming part of genealogy? And so I wrote the book based on what I thought would be compelling, what I wish I had 20 years prior. So when you think about your story, think about what's the most compelling. It's interesting to you, but also make it interesting to others. Because one of the lessons we learned when filming the show is if I'm sitting across from you in Genealogy Roadshow, you're interested in your story because it's your family. I'm interested in telling you your story because I researched it and I'm happy to share it with you. The person on the other side of that tube or television is only interested if it's compelling to them, if it inspires them. So think about your ancestors' lives as you go through this research process of what would be compelling to share. And also, the other thing in telling a great story is find your hero. So if I use my grandfathers as an example, I can use Lavelle Nathaniel Jones, my dad's father. And I could say, well, what lesson did he learn growing up in El Dorado, Arkansas, or him going into the Army? I could talk about Lawrence Berry, my mom's dad. My parents were not married, which is why I have my mom's name. What did Lawrence learn when he went to Pacific? What events did he witness? I will tell you this, my grandfather died at 94. He never told me anything about the Berry family, nothing. That is the one branch. So if anyone has any Berries, I probably don't know anything. I can't tell if you're related. That is the one branch that he held on tight to. And even when I was on television, I said, I'm on TV. People expect me to know this stuff. He was like, I'm not telling you anything. So I don't know, he kept it close. But he just never said, when he told my mom, like, what events did you witness? If you think about this, when you're talking to family members, you're interviewing them, he would always tell my mom, I was the cleanup man in World War II. What exactly did that mean? Does that mean that he was cleaning up dead bodies and parts? He never really opened up about that. And you may encounter that, but as you do the research and maybe you find some things for folks that are no longer here, you can talk about sort of what events they would witness. Genealogy is also about history and historical context. So when we think about our ancestors' lives, we need to put it in the context in which they lived. So if someone's around in World War II, someone's around during the Red Summer of 1919, was there a riot in their city? There were riots in Detroit in 1943. I didn't know that. Found that out. My grandfather was part of that. We think of the riots of 67, where my mother was part of that. So those are the things in telling a great story where you add the historical context, and you're educating someone. And so I like this quote from Jonah Sachs. One of the main reasons we listen to stories is to create a deeper belief in ourselves. Remember that you are telling the story of your ancestor who came before you, whose story has probably been forgotten, but whose story is important. I always say there's so many stories in so little time. So again, with telling a great story, you have to have a challenge, right? So what is the challenge? For, both of my grandfathers, it's being African-American men in the military. One from, my mom's dad was born in Detroit, but my paternal grandfather was born in Arkansas. So you have someone from the Midwest and someone from the South. You need conflict, and the conflict in that story is Black men going to war when in the middle of Jim Crow. And people love to be part of a journey. You love to be part of what this main character or person is doing. What happens to them at the end? How do they deal with this struggle? It doesn't have to be sad. Not every story has to be sad. There's triumph and joy that can be found in telling someone's story. It's just a matter of what you decide to focus on. And the thing about genealogy, we all go down these rabbit holes. I do the same thing. I mean, look, I can spend 5 hours looking at someone's second cousin, married to second cousin person down the road, and I'm knee deep in whatever. But when you're telling the story, people don't want those they want details, but they don't want the needless details. And then, you have to have these very interesting details, right? So if I would say with my grandfathers, you have one that's born in Detroit, and his family is from Macon, Georgia, the Berry side. His mother was an only child. Both her parents were enslaved. She lived to be 104. I did not interview her before she died, so take a lesson from me, because that is my biggest regret. But I could tell the story of him and how he went to war, and then after he got out of the war, he went to work for the U.S. Army. And that's what he did up until he retired. So I can talk about that and about his siblings. The other thing with the Berry side of my family, if I think of a story, is that of the 6 siblings, only one married. My grandfather did not marry my grandmother, which was an issue in the 50s, as you probably know. So none of them married. Why is that? What is that about? I still don't know. I don't have any answers for you, but that to me is compelling. And then you want to think about the humble beginnings, right? Someone started off with very humble beginnings, but, you know, from the bootstraps or whatever, they pulled themselves up and they were able to accomplish something. So when you're telling a story and you decide what you want to focus on, just make sure you think about a challenge that will make it interesting. Often you need conflict, and the journey is so important. The journey is so important. Oops. So then practice makes perfect. My mother used to tell me this all the time. She made me practice my handwriting every day. I know they don't teach cursive anymore, which will be a problem when folks start to do genealogy down the road, but you all know that. But so practice makes perfect. You get a genealogy buddy. Get someone who you can bond with, who does genealogy, who's just a nut like you about genealogy, to read your story, to help you flesh out that story. That's really important, because in genealogy, we're often isolated. We're in the library, or we're at home on our computer, and we're the one person sometimes in the family that does genealogy. But we need to have people to bounce ideas off of. And something that we may think that's not interesting may be interesting to other people. One example I would give you is when I started doing genealogy, I started with my ex-boyfriend's family. Because my family, they were just farmers in Virginia. Who cared about farmers in Culpeper County, Madison County, Virginia? His family was more exciting because you had doctors, you had lawyers, you had preachers, all of this. Well, my family's story from Culpeper, which I'll talk about in a minute, is just as important as his family's story. And only if I had someone who I talked to about it at that time, I might have realized that. So that's why having a buddy is important. And so here's another quote from Jonah Sachs. Stories are the original viral tool. That's it. It's the original viral tool. Everyone has a good story. You've heard some story. You've shared some stories. And once you tell a compelling story, the first thing someone does is they think is, who can I tell the story to? Who can I share this story with? And that makes for a very compelling story. So let's get to some questions. How do you gather this information? We all should be, and I know you guys had a session, if you attended, with Nika when she was talking about basic African-American, or beginning African-American genealogy. I'm sure she covered interviewing family members. That's kind of the basic stuff, right? You just want to get the data from them in the initial part. So these are some of the questions about their parents, where do they meet? What I find with a lot of clients that come to me to do research for them, they want to know that context around how did these folks meet? And we can't go back in a time machine. They're happy with the names, the dates, the places, the records, but they want to know, how did they meet? You know, if one was in Louisiana and one was in Alabama, where did they come together? Why did they get married in Arkansas? So if you have folks that are still around, ask them these questions, and then dig a little deeper. And what do you remember most about your childhood? I remember interviewing my mother, and she said, I think her favorite nursery rhyme or something was My Little Teapot. I don't know, it was kind of weird when she said it, but I remember interviewing her, and it was just because she's a very strict original helicopter mother. So having her say that to me, I was sort of like, I saw a different side of her. And, if you had any siblings. And the thing about my great-grandmother, Johnny, who died at 104, she actually had a sibling that died. Her parents were married twice, and she, on the 1900 census, when she was born in 1896-ish, or maybe around that time. But anyway, but on that census, her mother said that she had 2 children and only one was living, and it was their second marriage. So if I had asked her any of these questions, I would have found out, because my grandfather was born in Detroit, not in Macon, Georgia, where she was born. And then any funny stories. I mean, anything. One of the stories that my family talks about, even though we're recording this, they might be mad at me, but I'm going to say it anyway, we were at home. I went home for Mother's Day. And my cousin, so there's 4 cousins. I'm the oldest girl, or the oldest and oldest girl. My cousin Joy is the youngest, and she's a counselor, so she's asking all these questions. So they talked about the riots, and my mom and her sisters, their stair-steppers, talked about how they were outside, and someone said, we're going to burn down this furniture store. So you need to get what you can get. And so my mother said that they were like young, and they dragged this dining room table to the house. My grandmother was in the house. So they're dragging this dining room table. I'm thinking, and my cousin Joy had never heard the story, because her mother told her all she took was candy. And Joy was like, you took an entire table? I was like, yeah, well, a dining room set originally. But that's kind of to me, it's a funny story, because it's sort of like, just to imagine my mother, who was so strict with me, who, was like, you're going to college, you're going to get an advanced degree, to just know that about her, put her in a different light. And I find it amusing, because I think it's cool, it's good to know that stuff. And then when you learn more about your subject, what do you remember most about your family home? They grew up in the projects, so she had a lot of stories about the Brewster projects in Detroit. What do you remember about your hometown? The nursery rhyme or song, as I mentioned. But your favorite subject or least favorite subject in school. And, anything in your childhood that changed your perspective. I think that's important. Did something happen? And when you're interviewing people, one of the things to be very sensitive about, right, is it's hard for people to open up. As I mentioned about my grandfather, he didn't want to really tell me anything. But as he got later in his life, he talked a little bit about his military career. And he told me a story that he was in Virginia, and they had the signs, for colored only or whatever, and on the bus. And the sign was kind of like far back, but him and his friends had gotten on early, so they moved the sign up. And when they moved the sign up, they did so that all of the black women who were getting on the bus from Virginia to go to D.C. to clean the houses could actually have a seat. And he laughed about it, because he said all the white folks got on and they were confused because the sign was so far in the front. So everybody black had a seat, but the white folks didn't have a seat. And he told me that story, and I was like, oh my God, that's such a great story. And I think he laughed when he told me, and it was a special moment between us. So kind of if I answer these questions, for me, one of the things is, what do you remember about my hometown, right? So grew up in Detroit, weather's cold, which is why I live in Santa Monica, but I have to tell you, I'm really tired of cloudy weather right now. I did not move here for this. Okay, it is getting on my nerves. But one of the things that I like I used to live on the river in Detroit, Detroit River on Jefferson, and across the river, I shouldn't say street, but it feels like it, across the river was Windsor. And so the Purple Gang was a famous gang during Prohibition, and the river would freeze over, and the Purple Gang would literally drive cars across to Windsor to get liquor and then smuggle it through the building that I lived in, which was kind of interesting to me. And I liked, because Detroit has that kind of history. So I think one of the things, if you have anything that changes your perspective, when I was in second grade, I was at Monteith Elementary. I went there for first grade. I went to school the first day, and I ended up doing the same work that I did in first grade. And I was like, I went home to my mother. I was like, look, I'm doing the same thing I did in first grade. Like, I'm not feeling challenged. So she goes to school, and they're like, well, we'll just put her in fourth grade. My mother's like, that's not going to happen. I'm not putting my 7-year-old in fourth grade. So from that day forward, I just started bringing books to school, because I would finish my work before everyone else and then start talking, because I love to talk. But that's why I carry a big bag everywhere I go. There's something to read in that bag right now that I don't even have time to read, because I'm talking to you guys, but that's just something that I learned from my childhood that stuck with me. Or has stuck with me. And I wanted to be a fashion designer growing up. I love clothes. And I read Vogue. I was going to go to Parsons. And my mother told me, you cannot draw. You need to go to business school. So I ended up going to business school and becoming a lawyer. But I still would, at some point, I may take a class on fashion. But these are like just the little things I'm sharing with you that you can answer yourself and write your own story. When we talk about storytelling, it's not just your ancestors, it's also your story as well. And then I loved Barbies. That was my thing. I was a Barbie queen. I remember I grew up an only child, so I got the cottage, and being an only child, I told my mother I wanted a dream house. I made her go to Toys R Us and get me the dream house. Now, I was not really paying attention to the financial perspective of that, right? Because all I cared about was the dream house. But yes, I loved Barbies. That was like my thing, even though I don't plan on seeing the movie, though. So reversing the course. So what I did, this is James Philip Sellers, my third great-grandfather. And he was born in 1847 in Albemarle County, Virginia. And he's the son of Philip Sellers and Delilah Green. And James is interesting because I find him with my third great-grandmother, Emily Ann Carter, and her parents, but I know nothing about James. I've been to Charlottesville, I've been in Albemarle County, I've looked for him. I have his parents' names from cohabitation records, Philip Sellers and Delilah Green. He died in Leroy, which is where our family farm was. And they got married by James Garnett II at Crooked Road Baptist Church. And James was a white man. It wasn't a black pastor. And so for some reason, Emily and James decided to move to York, New York from Culpeper County, Virginia. And they did that around 1886. So Emily was the daughter of Lewis Carter and Martha Payne. And Emily is my genealogy angel. And if you don't have a genealogy angel yet, I hope you find one. She is a gift that keeps on giving. Like, this side of my tree is just so full with information. And, they say she was fair-skinned. My grandmother was very fair-skinned, small frame. My grandmother, all of her children and her grandchildren have small frames based on her. She smoked a corncob pipe. That's what I heard from my first cousin 3 times removed, Marion, who's, I think, about 95 right now. She died in Caledonia. And I found her father, my fourth great-grandfather. He entered a labor contract with Dr. John W. Taylor of Madison County. And he's listed as an agent in the 1870 agricultural schedule. When I first found Lewis in 1870, I thought he owned that land, but I realized that it was Dr. Taylor's land. And presumably Dr. Taylor is his enslaver, because that's what I'm thinking. One other hint of it is that Dr. Taylor's youngest daughter and Lewis's younger daughter have the same exact name, first and middle. So what does storytelling mean to me? It really, for folks who have enslaved ancestors, it really brings them to life. It humanizes them, in my opinion. And they are thankful. I put on here, and I was reviewing this, and I thought about the Charlottesville experience, where I was just been looking for people and how I found these names. So sometimes I go in courthouses, and I look for people, and I find all these names, and people just kind of jump out at me. But I'll tell you a different experience I had, and that's the University of Mississippi. So I work with a group called University Studying Slavery. And with University Studying Slavery, it's, probably 50 institutions right now. They're really focused on kind of reconciling slavery on campus, right? Recognizing people who built the university. But University of Mississippi, I was working with them on Roanoke, so Faulkner's home, which is actually owned by Robert Shegog, and there were 7 enslaved people that lived at Roanoke. So I did the research, and while I was there, I was in the special collections, and they had this little book, probably about the size, a little bit bigger than this iPhone, but like little book, red book. They pulled it out, and they were like, this is like it was like an account book from one of the enslavers in Oxford, Mississippi. And I just turned the pages, and there were just names of people. Isaac, Mary, Martha. Some of them had dollar values attached to them. Some of them had ages attached to them. And while I sat there, all I did is had the book, because it was on a stand, and I just turned the page every 30 minutes or so, just so they know that they were being seen, because they're no longer just in this red book somewhere in a special collection. So that's why I think when we talk about telling stories, and I talk about reversing the course on a sabbatical, and looking at Emily and James and Louis and Martha and Mildred, my fifth great grandmother, who my grandmother was named after, which she didn't know that. I got to tell her that before she passed, which was good. But these are folks who want to be remembered and who need to be remembered. And so with James, he was one of the trustees, of the founding trustees of Cedar Grove Baptist Church in Culpeper County. And, you know, the land was given, a half acre was given to Cedar Grove Baptist Church for the sum of $2 on September 15th, 1887. And that was by Lawrence and Matilda Wilholt. And so it was interesting for me because I lived in Virginia. I lived in Arlington. I lived in Alexandria. And I just got in the car one day and drove to Culpeper or to Madison. I found the land where they lived in 1870 because they were next to a school. So I was able to look at that, take a picture of that home before it was remodeled. But I also took the same drive or path they would have taken to Culpeper, especially to Cedar Grove Baptist Church. As genealogists, you know, we love a good cemetery, some of us. I know I do. So I was driving around looking at all the cemeteries as well. But it just gave me such a connection. When I decided on my sabbatical, I was like, maybe I'll go to Australia. But I decided, let me reverse the course. Let me go from New York to Virginia. Let me experience what James and Emily experienced, my third great-grandparents. It's kind of dark for this picture for some reason, so you can't really see it. But behind the trees is a farm, the home of them that's still in Leroy. But this is the farm that I knew. So this is the farm of John William Lewis, and my great-grandmother, Esther, her mother was Martha Sellers, and her father was John William Lewis. Now, you see I have the name Delilah Sellers up there. Well, her sister Delilah, her husband died in like, let's say 1895 or something like that. And Martha died a year after Martha, the youngest daughter, was born. So maybe around the same time, within a year or two. And so Delilah, Martha's sister, had 2 boys. John had 3 girls. So John and Delilah move in together, right? So in 1900, they're living together. Then, of course, they later get married. So Aunt Dale, who was Grandma Dale, was really, I had to straighten that out for the family, right? Because they only knew her. And she lived to be 101. So I'm fortunate on both sides of my family that I have folks that live to be over 100. So I should be around for a while. That's my thought process. So one of the things I love about research and where you can get that context for your stories is through newspapers. So if you guys know, newspapers.com obviously is subscription-based. But there's also Chronicling America. And Chronicling America is free. That's the Library of Congress site. And they have newspapers. And for folks that have, if you're Virginia, because that's where I research primarily a lot, there's also newspapers at the Library of Virginia that have been digitized. But what I love about this little nugget is for the Sellers and Price families holding their annual reunion, right? Their family reunion at this home on Labor Day, and their friends were present from Avon, I think that's how I say it, Scottsville, Rochester, and neighboring towns. And it tells all this business. Lewis Price, which is like probably my second or third great uncle, Philip Sellers, who was my third great grandfather, and then you have Emily Lewis, my great grandmother's sister, and then they say we're take place in the home of Lewis Price next year in Caledonia. This is from the New York Age. The New York Age, black newspaper, if your family lived in New York, they tell all the business of people in New York. Okay, every society thing. I was just wondering why my family's business was always in this paper. I mean, it's ridiculous how many articles I've clipped from newspapers.com. And I realized my third great aunt was actually the local distributor, so she made sure our family's business was in the newspaper, in the society page. So I have a plethora of information around them having reunions or having like the Phyllis Wheatley Society or anything like that. So it's very interesting because this can add context to your story. So this is Second Baptist Church in Mumford. So one of the things I did during that sabbatical is that this church, I think it was 125th anniversary. and most of my family attended this church. So I was able to go back to Second Baptist Church in Mumford. Then this is again in 2016. So it's founded in 1891. It's the oldest African-American church west of Genesee River, second oldest in Western New York. And you may ask yourself, and this is what I love about doing genealogy and I love about telling these stories, is sort of like, why did my family move from Culpeper County, Virginia to upstate New York, to Leroy? Like, what was the deal there, right? You know, I didn't have those summers where I went back to the South to visit relatives that didn't, move during the Great Migration, at least on my mom's side. And here we have it. After Civil War, the former slave, or enslaved person, I should change that, enslaved person, the Reverend Clayton Coles, came to the area to reside with his family. There's also a story around another gentleman who had fought, a white gentleman who fought in the Union Army, and saw all these African Americans who didn't have, were out of work, and said that they could come and farm in upstate New York. So what we see is from Culpeper County, Virginia to Leroy, there's like families, half that went and half that stayed in Virginia. And so here we have with the church, he founded and attended the Belcota Church, and then years later, the original church building from Belcota to George Street in Mumford, okay? So it moved from Belcota to George Street in Mumford. So this is kind of interesting to me because one of the things I thought about when my great-grandmother Esther died in, I believe, 1983, because that's when Joy was born. And she had moved back to New York after her husband died. My great-grandfather, Cecil Kendrick, died in around 1960s. And so she lived in this house with her sister, with her two sisters, actually her aunt and her sister. And so they were all the three old women, as my cousin Nina said, that lived in this house. But after that, we really didn't talk to people in upstate New York. There was no connection to them. So I took it upon myself to become that person. So I talked about earlier in Rochester how I had these cousins come and they all sat from lightest to darkest in the front row. It was me bridging that gap because we don't make trips to Leroy. I'd been to Leroy twice with my mom, actually once with my mother, and then I went back. And so I came back in 2016. So these are my cousins, and that's, it's me, and then in the middle is Terry, and then that's Nina, even though it's spelled Nina. And one thing about my family upstate is that if you saw us, I mean, we go from, it's like every shade that you can think of is what we are, right? And it's funny because they had heard about my grandmother, Mildred. They knew Esther, my great-grandmother, but they didn't really know about Detroit cousins. They never came to Detroit. So in doing my research, right, and telling my story and getting to know them and interviewing them, and all of them came with pictures. They all came with stories. Nina's mother, the one with glasses, Nina's mother, she was the one that kept the obituaries in the shoebox. I was so excited. I was like, yes. So she brought out the shoebox, and I was able to get all this information. So this is kind of, I'm sharing with you today, really what I've done in my own family. Now, I am also kind of not as good as I would like to be in sharing my story as often as I would like. But, I've reached out to these cousins. I've reached out to these folks. I've, had them share information with me. And I've interviewed them. And I've also respected their privacy and asked them if they wanted to be recorded or not. But I've also kept in touch. The other thing is keep in touch. Because if you come in and you seem like you're just trying to get the information and you dip out, people may not want to talk to you anymore. They may figure, why are you doing this? Or you trying to air the family dirty secrets or whatever, right? But keep in touch with folks. I have found that it's taught me a lot about my grandmother's side of the family. It's been rewarding for me to visit them, to spend my sabbatical with them. I mean, like I said, I was planning on going to Australia. I've never been there. But I thought, I can do that anytime. But this time with them is precious. And so Terry, I went to the church service with them. Nina, usher, Terry, I think, sings in the choir. Her husband's a preacher. We did all that stuff. Had dinner, met my cousins. It was fantastic. So when you think of your family story, right, and here's some tools for you to share your family story. But when you think of your family story, if you're thinking right now, I've learned so much about how to research my family today, or I've been doing research. I have all these documents. If they're in a binder, they're in a file folder, they're on your computer, wherever they are, or your tree on Ancestry, or Family Tree Maker, or any genealogy software. Think about, what can I do? My call to action, as we say in corporate, my call to action to you is, what can I do? Who can I write about today? Stop researching, pick one person that you can just write 3 pages about and tell their story and share that with someone, whether it's a genealogy buddy, a family member, anything. Because I feel like once you start to do that, once you just get out of the rabbit hole of research, you realize how special your family is, how unique your family is. You feel more of a connection to them. So not only visiting my family in upstate, but sharing their story in my book, sharing their story. I did a project called I Detroit and I wrote about DNA. I shared my grandmother's story, my grandfather's story, my great-grandparents' stories. I try to sprinkle it everywhere, even though I've not written a book about my family. I try to do that. So I encourage you to do the same. And here are some of the tools that you can use to do that. So if you have a personal blog or a website or a blog, I do not blog. I love writing, but I just don't have the patience to do it all the time. Obviously, your online family trees, if you use Ancestry, which is what I use primarily for mine, you can make notes and comments in there. You can upload items, Word documents, PDFs. And then if you have some digital storytelling platforms, there are a lot of storytelling platforms out there. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Roots Tech in Salt Lake City, one of the largest genealogy conference, typically held in March. Every time I go to Roots Tech, there's a new storytelling company. Everyone is about telling a story. Everyone. You know, Ancestry is going with Ancestry for All, and it's all about telling a story. So that's another way you can look. There'll be some apps and different things like that. The other thing is to look at social media platforms. Obviously, you have Instagram where you can share photos. You have Facebook. You know, there's groups and things like that. If you want to Twitter or whatever, I don't TikTok, but apparently you can TikTok and do that too. And the other thing is your family tree software. I personally use Family Tree Maker, and I also have a program called Hedris, Heredis. It's a French company. So I like Hedris for different reasons. Visually, it's a little different than Family Tree Maker, but Family Tree Maker is PC and Mac. I believe Hedris might be as well. And I think there's one other one I use that's just Mac-based. But you have family tree software to help you organize, collect, and a lot of those programs include reports or include an ability to like create a narrative. So you're not just starting from scratch. They're taking the data that you have and they're giving you a head start. So you can do that as well. And then if you want to do some video sharing platforms, if you're, want to interview somebody on camera or on use your smartphone, or if you want to just talk about your story, or maybe put it in context with something around history in Arkansas or Alabama. There's different ways for you to be able to tell your story. But I encourage you to tell a story. Pick one, start today or tomorrow. I know you got a busy day. Pick one and stick to it and try it. Because it's not that hard to do. Genealogy is overwhelming enough in itself. But because you have this big tree you're trying to put together, but take someone you've already researched, write their story down, share that story, and know that you will be inspired. It's like you're doing your own mini genealogy roadshow, and you're able to get that family member story out there. So I like doing that. I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to write for the remainder of my life and or career, and so I encourage you all to do the same. So thank you. So if you have any questions.
Thank you. That was wonderful information. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
You mentioned Family Tree Maker, and I didn't catch the other, the one you said that has a French name, I believe.
Oh, Hedris, H-E-R-D-I-S. H-E-R-E, excuse me, D-I-S.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure, no problem. It's hard to see people. Oh, there's one at the top, okay.
I wanted you to comment, first of all, excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for acknowledging that you're crazy. And mentioning that you utilized and recognized that stalker skills can have an appropriate place in the professional world.
Yes.
So I wanted you to comment a little bit further on the genealogists being the quote-unquote crazy ones in the family, or being seen as the crazy ones in the family. I wanted you to comment a little bit further on that and
Okay.
overcoming that stigma and utilizing in the way that you have.
So we're seen as the crazy ones in the family because I tell people, look, I have spent 20 years in tech. I'm still kind of in tech. And so when I tell people what I do, I say, oh, I look for dead people, right? And people kind of look at me weird. And I think we're seen as the crazy ones because we're asking all the questions. You know, every time at Christmas, I'm asking someone, well, what do you know about this? Granddad, can you tell me about this? So I'm digging deeper. And they're like, why do you want to know about that? Keep the past in the past. Why are you even talking about this? And so the way in which, even when I was on television, I said to my grandfather, my last name is Barry. You're a Barry. People expect me to know about the Barrys. I'm on TV. And he still wouldn't give up any information, as I mentioned during the presentation. So I think we're seen as the crazy ones because we're asking all these questions and you're curious about things. The way that you overcome that is by telling these stories. Because your family doesn't really care about seeing a genealogy report with all these dates, names, and places. But if you tell them that Uncle Joe was involved in this battle in World War II, or did this thing, or was involved in something locally in wherever you grew up, in Detroit or Macon, or me knowing that my grandfather was involved in the 1943 riots, which again, I didn't even know exist, people are interested. So the way to get over that or to combat that is to share the story. Because now it's not just you looking for dead people information, it's you actually looking for that, but using that to share the story with your family member. And they're more likely to listen to you when you share a story than when you share names, dates, and places. I hope that answered the question.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the information.
Sure.
I need to find out.
I can't see anybody.
Sorry. I need to find out something about my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
The last information that we received from them through my uncle, who did some research, was in 1891. How do I go to get something further than that?
So you're saying you're only going as far back as 1891?
Correct.
What year were they born?
This I don't even know.
Okay, so how did you get to 1891?
My uncle, who's passed away now, he did some research and he found out about everything that he could possibly find out. I know that my grandmother was from Haiti. And,
Okay.
And then my grandfather, I don't even know how they met. But I know when they came out here from Little Rock, actually Scotts, Arkansas, we were here, they were here for it. That's when we came in 1936.
Okay.
So that's all I know is about L.A. I don't know anything about Scotts, Arkansas.
Okay, so if he researched to 1891, or that's as far back as you can go, couple things. If you find him in the 1900 census, that should have the birth, the age, obviously, the relationship to the head of household, the age, the birthplace. Actually, 1900 will have the birth month and year. Yeah.
1900.
1900. Yeah, I'm trying to think in my head. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of what's on the census. But they should have that information. And so if you find them in the 1900 census, that should be able to give you at least an age. Obviously, the other thing you can do, you talk about Haiti, one of my favorite resources is familysearch.org.
Okay.
So familysearch.org for anybody. It's free. They have a lot of the same stuff that Ancestry has. So everybody in the audience, write that down. Familysearch.org.
Familysearch.org.
Yes.
Gotcha.
The other thing about Family Search I love is they have a wiki. Their wiki will give you information. If you just type in Haiti, it'll tell you where to go. It'll say, these are all the records available online for Haiti.
Great.
If you talk, if you talk, they do it by counties, they do it by state. I mean, it is my favorite resource, again, because it's free. So I would do 1900, I would do Family Search Wiki, and then that just kind of starts you, on your journey.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you so much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. All right, any more questions? I really can't see, but, okay. Oh, perfect.
I know you've got your job and sabbatical, and you're doing your own research for your family. But do you still actively practice doing research for other families?
Yes, so I left Cornerstone, which is where I worked. It's a tech company in Santa Monica. I left it 5 years ago after I wrote my book because I wanted to promote my book. Not known to many people, when you write a book, the publisher does not automatically promote it for you if you're not John Grisham, so you have to do some work on that. So that's what I decided, since it was the hardest thing I did in my life was writing my book, so I decided that I would leave because I worked so hard on that. And so right now, for the past 5 years, I do take client work. I have my podcast, and I'm working on my second book, and I do research for journalists and other folks as well.
And how would we get in touch with you if we wanted to be a client?
So if you want to get in touch with me, my email is just my first name, so KenyaTta @kenyattaberry.com. And my last name is Berry, like Hallie, but not related. Yeah. So, yeah, just shoot me an email, and just, you can put in the subject line, research. One thing I would say for folks, and I'm glad you asked this question, I was thinking about this in the car on the way here. When people want to find out about your family and you want to hire a professional genealogist, it's important that you send us information. Like, some people may send a novel. I'm not asking for that. But don't email me and say, I just want to find out about my family. I heard I had Native American ancestry. That gives me nothing to work with. Like, I'm gonna need names, dates, something. Just give me a little crumb to start with. Okay. So make sure when you email folks and you're hiring people, you actually include what you know, or at least a Cliff Notes version of what you know in the email.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's the podcast name?
The podcast is called Conversations with Kenyatta. I just had my 50th episode release, so yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm researching my father,
Okay.
and I can't find a birth certificate for him, but I was able to go on the Social Security site and get a breakdown of the SS5, I think it is. I'm having a problem. I need to connect I have a family story,
Okay.
and I need to connect the enslaver to my family. And I'm having problems because, the fathers and the mothers were not married. I can't find documents or sources that help me make those connections. I got all the information, and I know I can go all the way back to the DAR with this one man, but I cannot make that connection between my father's people and this man. And so I'm not sure where to go.
So if you're trying to make a connection between the enslaver and the enslaved, right, is essentially what you're doing. Because if you're talking about going back to the DAR, I'm assuming are you mentioning that you go back to the enslaving family to the DAR?
Yes.
Okay. So to make that connection between the presumed enslaver and the enslaved, you would need to find some document that has the enslaver's name on it and the enslaved. Those documents would typically be if the enslaver died before the Civil War, which I love an enslaver to die before the Civil War because that generates documentation, and if they're not in a burned county, or courthouse. But if he died before the Civil War, there should be some type of probate record, and that probate record will have a list of his property, and that's where the enslaved would be listed. So whoever your ancestor who was enslaved that you think is tied to this enslaver, you need to look for a document that has their name on it. So it would be an inventory within the probate record. That's one way to look at it. You know, if this person ran away at some point, you could look at newspapers for runaway slave ads. But really what's important is to understand the county where you're researching, because there may be some information in county histories. There may be local information at the state archives or the Historical Society or Genealogical Society. So I don't know exactly where you're looking, but wherever that ancestor lived, make sure you look at all the state resources as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Have you used DNA incorporated it into your research? And if you have, how has that pushed you forward or backwards?
I have used DNA. So I've taken my first DNA test was with Family Tree DNA, and they do mtDNA, Y-DNA, and autosomal. I've taken the test with 23andMe, the Ancestry and Health, and I've taken Ancestry's DNA. I tested both my mother, my father, and both my stepfather and my father have since passed on, but I've tested both of them, my mom, and then both of my grandparents. It's confirmed a lot of stuff for me with DNA, but it hasn't been, you know, the one thing about it is you have to find your most recent common ancestor. So I could have a third cousin I'm connected to, but that could be through slavery, right? So it really hasn't pushed me forward in a way where I had some big DNA breakthrough. I mean, my parents were my parents, thank God. I didn't find any half-siblings that I didn't know about, because that happens a lot. So I think for me, DNA has just been something that confirms what I already know. But I haven't really focused on it as much as I probably should, just because I don't have time to do my own research anyway, because I do client stuff and everything else. But it can be useful for adoptees, you know, for some folks, if you have an unusual surname. I mean, I did a documentary called Stand with a former NBA player, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, and we used DNA to help find part of his family, and they discussed that in the documentary. So it was really helpful there. It just hasn't been helpful for me personally. Yeah. Oh, I think we might be done with questions. Oh, one. Okay, I guess it's the last question in the back. I can't see you. Okay.
Hi.
Yes. Oh, I see you now. Okay.
Hi.
Right. Yeah.
So I was able to find a family member going back to the 1800s to 1860
Okay.
in Portsmouth, Virginia. But I wasn't able to go very much further than that. And then I learned about slave schedules, I guess, where people aren't really necessarily listed by name. How do you navigate around slave schedules or people who are not listed by name but you feel might be a part of the family tree because of the location or the time or maybe the seeming relationships?
Yeah, so a couple of things. With the slave schedules, for folks that don't know, there were slave schedules for 1850 and 1860. Those schedules there are some exceptions to the rule. Utah listed the names of the enslaved, but that's one I know of, but there might be some other ones. But 1850, 1860, really it's by the name of the enslaver, and then there's just the gender, the age, and the race or color, which is either black or mulatto, right? It's going to be B or M of the two you're going to see on that schedule. So the one thing you do with slave schedules is if you know the enslaver and you have a age range for your person who's enslaved, then you can identify them on that schedule, right? If it was someone who had a big plantation, 20 or more enslaved people, you're probably going to get multiple people that are the same age, right? You may get, 3 females that are 10 that are black at age 10. So really to do that, because you said you went back to 1860, I'm assuming you're saying 1860 slave schedule, not 1860 census, correct? Okay. So if you went back to 1860 slave schedule, then I would, if that's a possible candidate for an enslaver, right? Because you always have candidates of folks that are enslavers, unless you know for sure, right? Or unless it's an unusual surname. Then I would see if they enslaved anybody within that age range, but you need to verify that with other documentation, whether it's the will, the probate records I talked about, if they died before slavery ended, before emancipation, any other account papers, anything that might be in the local library, but you're in Virginia. So I know for Culpeper, where my family was, they had cohabitation records. So upon emancipation, they had cohabitation records where the enslaved would say, this is the person who enslaved me, both the husband and wife, and these are the children that we had while we were together, enslaved. So if you can find cohabitation records for that area in Virginia, that would definitely give you the name of the enslaver. And Library of Virginia is your favorite resource since you're in Virginia. They do a great job. They've digitized a bunch of stuff. They have the Virginia newspapers. So I would start there, looking for cohabitation records, going to Library of Virginia, and then obviously with the possible enslaver, seeing if the age range matches. You're welcome. All right, I think you guys got other events. It's probably time for me to go. But thank you guys for today. I really appreciate it. It's fun.